Hey guys, it's Michelle. I'm coming to you from my basement now. So I have a fancy whiteboard that my fiance Ian and his daughter Marissa got for me. So we're gonna try this out. So I have a question for you to start off. So we're talking about quadratics, and you guys did a great lesson last week where you looked at the intro, you answered some questions. So we're gonna really start looking this week at how do we solve them. So I'm going to start you off with this question. It's my riddle. So what is the number or numbers that when you square them, you will get 16? Essentially what I want to know is, I'm going to scoot you closer. What number can I put here that if I square it, I will get 16? So please take a minute, pause this video, and think about your answer. Okay, so I'm sure most of you guys said, oh, 4, because if I put 4 in here, if I take 4 and I square it, I'll get 16. And you're absolutely right, but is there another number? So every year when I do this in class, people say, no, there's no other number, but I'm going to tell you there is another number. So what's another number that if I square it, I will get 16. I want you to take a minute, pause the video, and think about what's another number that if you square it, you'll get 16. Okay, so in the past when I've done this, people have said, well, what about a decimal, like 3.5 or 3.9 or whatever? Well, that's not going to work, but think about your signs. So think about this. If I take -4 and I square it, does that give me 16? Well, remember, that means I'm going to take -4 times a -4. Or remember, 4 and 4 will give you that 16. But remember, the negative and the negative give you a positive 16. So remember, there are two numbers that if you square them, you're going to get 16. And that is 4 and -4. All right, so I just wanted to start us off by thinking about that. And that's going to lead into our next question. So here's our next question. And this is kind of going to be the point of this lesson, is how can I solve equations like this? So I'm going to give you an equation. I'm going to give you x squared equals 36. Well, how do I get x by itself? Well, I have x squared here and 36, right? Just like any normal equation, I want to get x by itself. So I need to think about, well, what is the inverse, my opposite, right, of this exponent of 2? Well, if you think about the power charts and everything we've talked about, remember how we get rid of this exponent of 2, the inverse is we take the square root. So here's the deal. Essentially what I want to know is, I'm going to step back a second, rewind. So essentially what I know is what is the number I can put in for x that when I square it, I will get 36. So think about that. What is the number you can put in for x, and when you square it, you get 36. Okay, so if we think about just like direct problem solving. So I want to get x by itself, so I'm doing my inverse of this x squared. And remember that inverse is the square root, so I'm going to take the square root of x. Well, remember the idea is the square root and the exponent of 2, they're inverses, they will cancel out, so I'm left with just x here. So then what I want to know is, when I think about the square root of 6, or 36, I'm sorry, yeah, I'll get 6, but remember I'll also get a -6. Dang it. Hey guys, it's Miss Shelley. I'm coming to you from the basement now. So I have this new fancy whiteboard that my fiance Ian and his daughter bought for me. So we're going to try this and hopefully it works well, right? Okay, so we've been talking about quadratics, and last week you guys did a really great job with looking at that problem with like predicting will the ball go in the hoop and looking at kind of the key features of those parabolas, right? So what I really want to get into this week is, well, how do we solve those quadratic equations? And remember, quadratic equations just mean you have an exponent of 2, right? That's all they mean. So I'm going to start us off today with a riddle. So here's my riddle. I'm thinking of a number that if I square it, I'll get 64. So essentially what I know is, what number can I put in here, and if I square it, I'll get 64. So I want you to take just a moment, pause this video, and think about it. What number or numbers will give me this? So take a minute, pause it, and think about it. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you guys said, oh, 8, because if I put 8 in here and I square it, that gives me 64. And you're absolutely right. But I'm going to tell you, there are 2 numbers that if I square them, I will get 64. So I want you to take a minute and pause the video and think about, well, what other number, if I square it, will give me 64? Take a minute, pause the video, and think about that. Okay, so in my previous years, a lot of people said, well, what about a decimal? What about like 7.4 or 8.2 or whatever? Well, those won't come out to just be 64. So I really want us to think about signs. Remember, a positive 8 squared gives me a positive 64. But if I take a decimal and I square it, it is not going to give me this whole number, right? So let's think about signs. What if I were to take a negative 8 and square it? Would that give me 64? Well, let's think about it. If I take negative 8 times another negative 8, well, 8 and 8, that gives me 64, no doubt. And remember, the negative and the negative, when I multiply them, give me a positive 64. So yeah, I have 2 numbers that if I square them, give me a positive 64, and that is 8 and its counterpart of a negative 8. And this is really going to be kind of crucial to where we're going for the rest of this unit. So I really wanted to bring this up. Okay, take a brief minute for me to pause and erase. And then I'm going to kind of come up with our first example problem. Okay, so here's a question for you. Instead of saying like what number will give me this, what if I said x squared equals 49? Remember, what I'm asking is what number or numbers, if I put them in for x and I square it, will give me 49. So remember, that's what I'm looking for, is what number or numbers will give me that. And a lot of you guys are probably saying, oh, 7 and negative 7, right? A lot of you have probably caught that on. But here's the deal. I want us to think about, how do we solve it directly? Just like normal, like distribute, combine like terms, add, subtract, or multiply, divide, right? So our regular DCM steps. Well, if we think about this, I want to get x by itself. So what's the inverse of squaring something? Well, we've talked about this before. The inverse of squaring something is taking the square root of it, right? Those are your opposites, your inverses. So what I can say if I'm trying to solve this directly is, if I want to get rid of this exponent of 2, I'm just going to take the square root of both sides. All right, cool. Well, remember, this exponent of 2 and my square root sign, they will cancel out. I'm left with just what's underneath, which is this x. But here's the deal. I don't just have one answer. I have 2. Anytime you take a square root, you will always have 2 answers. One is, well, what's the positive of the square root of 49? And the other is, well, what is the negative of the square root of 49? So kind of like we were talking about in that question I asked you earlier with the riddle, remember, there's 2 ways I can make a positive 49. One is the positive, one's the negative. So if I think about this, well, what's the positive number of the square root of 49? Well, 7. And then what is the negative of the square root of 49? 7 as well. So anytime we're working with these quadratic equations, we can have up to 2 answers. One is the positive, one is the negative. Okay, so I did a whole lot of explaining there, but I want to show you how simple this really is. All right, so let me give you another problem. Let's say we have x squared equals 121. Okay, cool. Remember, I want to get x by itself, because essentially what I'm asking myself is, what number, when I square it, gives me 121? And a lot of you guys probably can do this without doing any work, but I want to show you this process because it will be important later. Okay, so what do? Well, I want to get rid of this exponent of 2. Remember, the inverse is taking the square root of both sides. So remember, these cancel out, right? They're inverses, so I just get x. But remember, anytime I take the square root, I have to think about those two options. One is the positive of 121, and one is the negative of 121. So remember, we're going to get two different answers. One is going to be that x is the positive of the square root of 121, which is 11, and also that x is going to be the negative of the square root of 121, which is negative 11. All right, so the big thing I want us to think about is anytime we have something, I'm going to write over here, where we have, I'm just going to make something up. Anytime we see this exponent of 2, remember, we can have up to 2 answers. Maybe not always, and we're going to get into that more, but we can have up to 2 answers. One is the positive, one is the negative. All right, I hope this made sense. If you feel comfortable with this, go on to your independent practice. But if you feel like you want to see another problem, stay with me. I'm going to give you one more problem. Okay, so let's try this. Let's say we have x squared equals 9. Remember, I'm asking myself, what number, if I square it, gives me 9? And some of you may already have the answer, but remember, if we want to solve it directly, what we do is we do the inverse of this x squared. So take the square root, our inverse, and then I'm going to get x equals, and again, 2 answers. Anytime we actually put the root sign over something, there are 2 answers. One is the positive of that root, and the other is the negative of that root. Okay, so cool. Well, what's the positive of the square root of 9? 3. All right. Well, what's the negative of the square root of 9? 3. Okay, great. There are 2 answers, and that is it. All right, y'all. I hope this helps. If not, please join my office hours and all of that. Love you guys. Bye-bye.